guys, today's video is probably one of my most anticipated videos of the year. It's at least one of the videos that tends to get the most views and what you guys seem to be very interested in. And it's also one of my favorite but hardest videos to film. So I'm going to be sharing with you today my top 20 palettes of 2023. This was hard. Let me just tell you. So what I normally do in these videos every year, I've done ranking my top 20, but then I've done separate videos with the top 5 where I show you the palette one by one and do a look with them. Gonna do it a little bit differently this year just because I don't have time to do it with my top 5, so I'm gonna do dedicated videos on my top 3. So you're gonna see the rankings up until spot number 4, and then number 3, 2, and 1 are going to be separate videos. So that is what we're gonna go ahead and do. Now I do have to preface this by saying that all of these palettes are obviously amazing, and there has been a lot of really good palettes coming out this year. And if there are any palettes that you thought I would add into this ranking, it's simply just because it's probably just a color story thing, and maybe it just isn't what I've been gravitating towards lately. And it's no shame to any of the palettes that I haven't included in this because, like I said, there's been a lot of palettes that have been really amazing, but when I was picking out my palettes for this, I basically laid out like all my candidates in front of me, and I was like, what are the palettes that I would like actually want to use right now? Like, what am I in the mood for? What am I feeling? Like, which of these color stories are speaking to me the most? Which do I have the best memories from? Which ones have I actually used the most throughout the year? So there's a lot of things that go into this ranking. So just wanted to kind of put this in here. I also do have codes with a lot of these brands. I will have all of the palettes that are available still linked down below with my codes. Most of them are going to be affiliated, which will be marked with a little star next to it, just so you know. So we're just gonna go ahead and jump in. So let's start on the number 20 spot. So this is a fairly new palette, but I felt like this deserved to be in here because I just had a really good time with it. The quality is amazing. It's a brand that I really, really love. And even though a lot of people were a little bit upset with this palette because the outside didn't really match the inside of the palette, this is the What's Up Beauty. What is the name of this? It's called the Dragon Eye palette. Packaging is absolutely stunning. Now, when I show you the inside, if you haven't already seen this palette, it obviously doesn't really like match all of this amazing, beautiful artwork that's on the outside. It's kind of just not a bland, boring, neutral palette, but like some people might call it that. But why it's in this ranking is because the formula in here is so good. Like, these shimmers are so sparkly, they're so shiny, they wear so well, they just look really, really beautiful, and they just go really nicely with this color story. And it's also just a very easy palette to use. It's a very user-friendly palette. I think that if you're someone who maybe don't have that much experience with makeup, this would be a great palette for you. It's just all the tones go nicely together and you can't really mess it up. And for me, this would be a palette that, because of the size of it, I could easily bring this traveling. And even though I don't go traveling that often, I do have like trips here and there throughout the year, and like, this is the kind of palette that I would bring along with something else. So I just wanted to put it in here because I really enjoy this palette. I really enjoy the brand, and I felt like it needed to be in this ranking because it makes me excited, and it's a palette that I want to use again. Spot number 19, I don't think it's going to, well, maybe it would be a little bit of a surprise because it's kind of low down compared to where I usually put these palettes. So this is actually one of the new Blend Bunny palettes that came out this year, and this is called the Sickly Sweet palette. Now, the reason this one didn't end up higher, even though I love the formulas in here and I love Blend Bunny as a brand, they're literally like one of my favorite brands, I just don't really reach for pastels that often. But having said that, this is probably my favorite pastel palette in my collection, and I'm thinking if I were to rank this, assuming that I could use it together with something else and like how I would use my collection if I wasn't reviewing makeup, this palette would probably end up higher because it would be such a good companion palette to like almost every other palette that I own. So I did want to put it in here because it is a beautiful palette, and even though I don't really do all pastel looks, you can definitely get full looks with this because there are some deeper shades in here that make that possible. So I really like that about it, but it's also one of those palettes that I feel like are a must to have in one's collection. If you are someone who likes eyeshadows, having pastels to work with together with other things, it just makes like blends really easy, and you're also able to just like add in that little extra pop of color to more maybe neutral looks or something like that. So I just think it's a very usable palette, and a palette that I can see myself having in my collection for a very, very long time just because of that. In the 18th spot, I think is the only palette from this brand that made the top 20, but again, it doesn't mean that the other palettes from the brand are bad by any means. I actually like every single palette that I've tried from this brand, and this is Fantasy Cosmetica. Now, this is the only palette I've made it into this ranking because this is just the color story that I like the most from the brand. And I think this is such a fun, cool color story that, again, this is more of a companion palette for me, but the shimmers in here, these two in particular, are so, so pretty. Also, if you're wondering what's on my eyes today, I will tell you when I get to the palette that I used. But I just think this is a really fun palette. I like the 9-pan format. I really like the color story in here, and there's a lot you can do with this despite it only having 9 pans. So I really wanted to add one of the palettes from Fantasy Cosmetica into this ranking because I really like them as a brand, and I feel like they deserve it because I've given basically every one of their palettes a really, really good review. But this is the one that I personally like the most, mostly just because of the color story. In the 16th spot is the first palette in this ranking from this brand. I actually have more from this brand in this ranking because I have really fallen in love with this brand, and this is a brand that I tried for the first time, I'm pretty sure, this year, like in the very beginning of the year. Also, I should probably say that I don't think all of these palettes came out this year, but I tried them for the first time this year. Or I tried them at the very end of last year, but they weren't able to make it into last year's ranking. So just another little disclaimer. But anyway, this palette is going to be the Cozy Cabin palette from Simply Posh Cosmetics. This is also quite a new palette, but I had a really, really good time with this. And this is definitely Simply Posh's good formula. I've said many times in the past, they've had some issues with some of their palettes getting hard pan with the shimmers. I want to say it was the 2 palettes that came out like before this one, but they've definitely fixed the issue because this one and the latest palette that they've come out with have been amazing. So yeah, I just think the color story in this is really, really fun. And I also like the theming of it. Like, it's very much a kind of wintry palette without being too Christmassy, but still being a Christmas palette. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it is beautiful. I think the shimmers are absolutely stunning. I love the color story of this. I like that you can get pretty deep, dark looks out of it. You can get more neutral looks out of it. You can play in this area and get more of like a bluey purpley look. There's a lot you can do with this. Very versatile palette, beautiful formula. I think the mattes from Simply Posh are so easy to work with. They're pigmented, they build, they blend, they do everything I want, and the shimmers are always just stunning. So one of my favorite palettes from the brand and one of my favorite palettes of the year. In the 16th spot is going to go to the Basic Witch palette from Bella Beauty Bar, and oh no. One of the shades just fell out and now I have purple eyeshadow all over my desk. I don't know how that happened, but I'm gonna clean that up. Anyway, I was saying that this is one of my favorite palettes for this year. I mean, it made it into this ranking, and it's just a really nice palette, and now I'm sad because I'm missing a shadow, and I guess it was just a purple matte, which is fine because there are purple mattes in here already, but that's sad. That's really sad. But this is a beautiful palette, and I wouldn't be afraid of this like happening to you if you bought this palette. I don't know what happened. Maybe I've been throwing it around too much, but beautiful palette, really nice brand. Shimmers are amazing. I like the matte color story a lot, and again, there's just a lot you can do with this. These are the kind of shimmers that I just love. I think they're so sparkly, so pretty, so shiny, and it's just a really fun color story. Next up is going to be, I don't know if maybe this will come as a surprise to some of you, but probably not, because I have been kind of into neutrals this year, and when I say kind of, I mean kind of a lot. And you'll see that in the palettes moving forward. There's actually quite a few like neutral-ish palettes in here because it's just what I've been wanting. Like, neutral-ish looks with pops of color have been like my jam this year. I don't know why, don't ask, but that's just how it's been. So this is the Glaminatrix Sugar and Spice palette. This is such a fun, I feel like, neutral palette with a twist. I'm not sure if I've ever seen a neutral palette with like pops of pastel mattes. Like, that to me is definitely like unique and different, and I just love the shimmers in here. The shimmers are beautiful, mattes are beautiful. If it sounds like I'm talking a little bit strange, it's because I had like the biggest canker sore like right in my mouth, and it is so painful. Like, it hurts. And it's driving me crazy. It's been like a week and a half now. Anyway, this palette, beautiful, beautiful color story, beautiful formula. I really like Glaminatrix as a brand. I think they're amazing, and I just think that this is a very fun twist on a neutral palette. Next palette is also a bit of a neutral palette with a twist, even though a lot of people would say this is like a 2017 palette with mostly neutrals and pops of blue, but this is the Nimia palette, and this is the palette that Nikki Tutorials did with her brand, and I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about this, but I have brought this traveling, I think 4 times maybe. Like, it it's just like one of those neutral palettes that just like hits every spot for me. Like the tones and the mattes are really nice. I can do so many things with this. I love the shimmers in here. They're so just like sparkly and pretty. I love the pops of blue, and I've had a lot of fun with this palette. I will say the times that I've used this palette, I've mostly used it together with something else, but I just think it's a really, really nice formula, and I'm very happy I have it in my collection, and I don't really see myself decluttering this for a while because it is just a very, very nice palette. And this orange here is like the brightest, like most neon orange eyeshadow I think I have in my collection. It is absolutely insane. It's kind of crazy, honestly, how pigmented that shade is. Next palette in the bunch is going to be the Delicious Delights palette from Cosmic Beauty. They used to be called Cosmic Brushes, and then they changed their name, so this is their pastel palette. This is also a palette that I brought traveling twice, I think, since I got it, because it's just a pastel palette that goes really well with other things. So like I would bring a palette like this together with something like the Nimia palette, or like another sort of neutrally palette that I'm going to show you later, and this just works really well with that. And it's just kind of what I've been into. Like I said, I feel like I have my thing right now with how I like to do my makeup. Obviously, I still love doing like, you know, crazy blue looks and very, very colorful looks, but on days where I'm not filming, I tend to go more on the neutrally plus color side. It's rare that I do all neutral looks, but I really like injecting colors into neutral looks. I think that's just really fun. So this palette is really nice. I love Cosmic Brushes, or Cosmic Beauty as a brand. I think their formula is really, really nice, especially for the price point. And they're not even just good for the price, they're just good, period. And I love the fact that they're able to keep their prices down as low as they are, because their palettes are amazing. And I also really like their packaging. Like, I thought before I tried them that this was sort of a plastic packaging that would make it feel kind of cheap, but it's like a thick cardboard, and I really like that. And I also like that they have mirrors in them. Just really, really nice palette. I love this brand. Next up, like I was saying before with Simply Posh, I do have a couple more palettes actually in here back to back that I want to mention. So this was the first palette that I tried from the brand, and it was at the very beginning of the year. I think this palette came out last year, if I'm not mistaken. But again, I tried it this year for the first time. This is the Genuine Gems palette. I'm pretty sure they've sent me all of these in PR. I may have bought like one of the first ones. I honestly don't remember, but that doesn't change my opinion about any of these palettes, and you guys know that. But I think this is a beautiful palette. The glare is a little bit annoying with the gold in the background because it's a little bit hard to show like the actual colors, but such a beautiful palette. Again, this is one of those palettes that made me fall in love with the brand. The shimmers in here are beautiful, and I love the matte selection. I think there's so much you can do with this. And this palette actually goes quite a bit deeper than it looks as well. Like, it doesn't look like these colors are like that dark, but you can actually get a lot of depth with these. And I also just love the variation in tones. Like, I really like this green row. Like, I feel like these two greens are pretty unique, I would say, to my collection. Just like looking at them tone-wise, I can't think of any other palettes that have especially a shade like this. Like maybe one of the Blend Bunny palettes, but it's just a very unique palette in my collection, and one that I really, really like working with. Next up is a palette that is on my eyes today, and I really wanted to just use this one more time. I just made a video with this palette doing a first impression, and this is the newest palette from Simply Posh, and this is the Aurora Lights palette. So again, it is what is on my eyes today. I can link the video that I did my first impression with up in the corner if you do want to check this out. I didn't film this look, I just did it so I could like test out the palette to make sure that I felt like this palette deserved to be this high in the ranking. But I really do feel like it does, because it is a beautiful palette, and I love the mattes in here. Like, the mattes are so fun. Also, the shimmers, absolutely stunning, so sparkly, so pretty, just absolutely beautiful. Everything that I like in shimmery eyeshadows, I feel like are in here. They're sort of on that kind of sheer side. They don't have that full opacity that, you know, shimmers back in the day, maybe 3 years ago, like think Juvia's Place brands, they used to have the most amazing shimmer formula back in the day. Like, everybody used to drool over that, and it was basically just a very metallic shiny shimmer, but these are more on like that sheer sparkly side, and I just love that. Like, that makes me so happy. So really, really nice palette. Super, super happy to have gotten this one in PR. I will also mark down below in my description box what I've gotten sent and what I haven't, because a lot of these have definitely been PR, and I mean, maybe should have mentioned that already, but if you watch my channel for a while, you probably know that already. The next palette is going to be a fairly neutral palette, and I literally have purple eyeshadow all over my hands right now. Like, this is going to become a problem. Anyway, this is from BeBeautiful again, and this is the Smoky Glam palette. So this is their version of a neutral palette. It's very large. I think if this palette had been condensed down a little bit and just been a little more curated, then I think this palette would have ended up a little bit higher for me. It's mostly the size that pulls this down, but I think this is a beautiful neutral palette with a bit of a twist. I like the fact that there are these kind of murky greens down in the corner. There are so many beautiful shimmers in here, and I like the inclusion of the pinks and the purples to go with more of these like mauve-y, like neutral shades. I just think it's really, really pretty. So I did feel like I had to add this in here. I actually used this palette 3 days ago. I just wanted to do a pretty simple look, and I pulled this out and I used a couple of neutrals together with some of the pinks, and it just looked really nice. So really like this palette, great quality. Again, really love the brand. So if you haven't tried BeBeautiful yet, I would highly recommend, because all of their palettes are really, really nice. Next up, I think is the first Udensai palette that I have in my ranking, and I have, do I have 2 in here? I think I have 2 in here. So again, there's been so many great releases from Udensai that it's been really hard for me to pick the ones that I like the most from this year. And it's just, again, it's come down to color stories. I love Udensai as a brand, but I feel like some of the color stories, like the Christmas palettes were nice, but they're not the kind of color stories that I want to just reach for right now. And I can't really even explain why. It's just like not what I'm in the mood for. So this is one of my favorite palettes from the brand, actually. This is the Stone and Rock palette. It is such a beautiful, beautiful green palette with a couple of neutrals in there. It goes very, very deep and dark. I love that it has like these like lighter shades in it, and it goes very deep, and it's just so much you can do with this. It's, if you like green eyeshadows, I mean, you might need this palette. I don't know. It is absolutely stunning. The formulas are so nice, and I just really love this palette. I think it is so, so pretty, so well curated, so much you can do with it, very user-friendly. It's hard to mess up because all the tones just go really nicely together. So you're never gonna end up with a muddy look at all because you're mixing colors together that don't go together, because they all just work really well together. So I appreciate that very much. Now, the next palette, I feel like is a palette that I questioned whether I should put this into the video, because I feel like after I posted my video with this, a lot of people were saying that this is a brand that's private labeled. They found it on AliExpress, they found it on Amazon, and like I did my own research. I couldn't find this palette anywhere else after I reviewed it. Maybe other people had seen it before, I really don't know, but this is from BeBeautiful Cosmetics, and it's their Motamorphosis palette. I've also had a lot of people say that this is sold out. I don't know how ethical this brand is. I really don't know. I randomly saw it in someone else's videos and I was like, wow, what a beautiful palette. Buy at your own risk. That's all I'm gonna say, but I do want to mention it because honestly, this palette is amazing. Like, I don't know where this brand came from. I don't know where it's made. I don't know if other brands have made it. I honestly don't even care at this point because it's just a really pretty palette. And the formulas are beautiful. The color story is so nice, and I love this palette, honestly. Like, I wish that it was more of a reputable brand, I guess, but I guess it's not. I really don't know, but I did feel like I needed to mention it because I gave it such a high review when I did my video on it, and I still stand by that. I still stand by this being an amazing palette. Take that for what you want. I mean, I don't even know. Like, I really want to use this again because that is how much I like it. So, great palette, great color story. Yeah. Next up, I think we are on the number 7 spot. I kind of lost a little bit of track in between, and I can't even speak to it because that was not a real sentence. But this is a palette that I bought at the very end of last year, so I didn't add it into last year's ranking. And this is also an old palette, but I got one of the Pat McGrath palettes, the Mothership palettes, during her, was it Black Friday sale? Or it was a really good sale, but this is the, I always forget the name of this, Bronze Seduction palette. Now, you look at this and you're like, Annette, that's not really your aesthetic, your thing, but here's the thing, like, the amount of times that I have used this palette is actually insane. I know it doesn't look like it, but I have dipped into these 2 mattes, this purple, and these 2 shimmers so many times. Like, it is actually insane how many times I've used this palette, and I just think it is so pretty. Like, the special shades truly are special, and I never thought I would say that after having tried so many indie brands that I love that are amazing, but these 2 shadows are so, like, so nice. Like, I find myself wanting to use this shade in so many of the looks I do when I don't film. It's kind of crazy. And I also just, I really like the mattes in here. Now, this shade, and this shade, I barely dipped into, but it's just because they're not my kind of colors. Like, if these hadn't been in there and it was just these 3 and these 4, like, it would be one of my absolutely perfect neutral palettes of all time. Yeah, there are a couple of shades I don't love, but just because of how many times I've used this palette and how much I like the shades that I gravitate towards in this palette, I just felt like I needed to add it really high into my list because it is a palette that I've just been using a ton, and I think that needs to count for something, you know? The fact that I've used a palette as many times as I've used that one clearly means that I really like it. So next up we have spot number, let's see, 4, 5, 6, and this is another palette from Cosmic Beauty, and this is their Muse palette. This is a palette that I've also brought traveling quite a few times actually, and I find this to be a very useful palette. It has, you know, some neutrals in it, it's got a lot of color in it, the shimmers are really pretty. I do think it's more of a companion-ish palette for me just because I prefer having a couple more lighter shimmers, but again, because of how many times I've used this palette and because I'm still excited to have this palette in my collection and I still want to use it, I just felt like it needed to be this high. So it's a beautiful palette, like I said before, with their formula is just really, really nice. Very solid. I've never had any issues with the mattes. They always build, they always blend, they're always very pigmented and pretty, and their shimmers are just very solid. I wouldn't say they have my favorite shimmer formula of all time, but they just look really nice on the eyes. They wear well, they just look really pretty. So yeah, I don't know, there's something about this palette that kind of speaks to me. And it's maybe just because of what I've been into lately that I like this palette so much, but it's just a really, really nice palette. The next palette is sadly one that is actually not available anymore, but I did talk to one of my friends who actually picked this up at TJ Maxx not that long ago. So this is another Pat McGrath palette, and I think I bought this, did I buy this very late last year or beginning of last year? I think beginning of last year. I don't remember when this collection came out, but this is called the Velvet Liaison palette, and it's one of the 6 pans. This is the all matte palette. Now, the reason this is so high is, again, because I have used a shit out of this. Like, these 4 shades, like, these are my 4 perfect neutral shades. Like, no joke. Like, I don't need these 2. This is what I reach for this palette for. I think I've brought this traveling every time I've gone anywhere this year. I've used it so much. I love this shade as a transition shade. It looks very, very light, but I love using this on like super quick makeup days. This is my crease with like an iridescent shimmer, like from Cleona or something on my lid. Just beautiful, like so easy, so pretty, just like quick and out the door. And I also just love this for like more dramatic neutral looks. If I want to use some kind of maybe a black base multi-chrome or something like that, I can do like these 2 in my crease and it just looks so pretty. Like these tones just work so well for my skin tone, I feel like, that I keep using this. And I also like that it has a bone colored matte in it just because of, like I said, if I am going traveling and I have days where maybe I don't want to use eyeshadow, I do like having something like this to like set my lid with so it doesn't crease throughout the day. So it's just a very, very usable palette for me, and one that I've, you know, taken with me so many times, and I keep reaching for this, and I just think it's really nice. And I wish it was still available because this is just amazing quality, and the more I use that palette from Pat McGrath, the more I want to get more of her stuff. But then I look at her stuff and it's like, it's all the same. And I'm like, I don't need anything else because I have all I want from her. So anyway, in the number 4 spot, this is a palette that just barely did not make it into my top 3. And I'm a little sad about it. But when I was comparing this to the one in the number 3 spot and like genuinely ask myself, like, which one do I actually want to use for a video? The number 3 spot actually won out, and you'll be surprised when you see my number 3 spot, I think, because it's not a palette that I don't think any of you expect it to be as high as it is, but this is the number 4 spot, and this is the Jewels and Gems palette from Unsai. I remember ranking this on top in ranking my last 20 palettes or whatever when this palette was included in it, because there is something so magical about the tones in here. Like every look that I've done with this palette have just been so pretty. It's made me feel just very put together, but also the shimmers are so special and so sparkly and so beautiful, and they go so well with the mattes. And when I first got this palette, I was like, yeah, I don't really like this color story. Like, I literally was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this. Having used it, I love it. I just think it is so pretty. And even though I wasn't expecting these tones of kind of neutrals to look good on me, they actually look so good on me, and I was very surprised by that. So I felt like I needed to put this as high as it is because it just surprised me. It really surprised me, and it's a palette that I didn't think I would really like that much, but I ended up loving. So it just goes to show that even if there are color stories that maybe you don't think are going to work that well for you, give it a go. Especially if it's something that you already have in your collection that you haven't played a lot with, give it a second chance. Like, use those shades that maybe you're not really gravitating towards because they might surprise you. You never know how you're going to feel about something until you try it. So those are going to be my top 20 outside of the top 3, obviously, that I will do dedicated videos with, like I said. I would love to hear your guesses. Which 3 do you think will be my top 3 palettes of the year? I'm so curious to see if anyone gets it right, because I feel like this year I haven't been as, how do I put this? I haven't been as enthusiastic about like 1 or 2 or 3 palettes as I feel like I have in the past couple of years. Like, there's always been a couple of outliers for me that when I've reviewed them, I've been like, this is probably gonna end up in my top 3. And I feel like only really one of these palettes, I've been very obvious about this being one of my favorite palettes in my collection, or like of the year or whatever. And picking out my number 1 palette was honestly the easiest out of all of these. Like, I put them on the floor and I was like, that one. That is my favorite palette of the year. Everything else I was kind of like, like, I don't know. So leave your guesses down below. I would love to read them. I can't wait to see what you guys think, if any of you are right. My next video is going to be with my 3rd best palette of the year, and I'm excited. I hope you're excited too. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see some other ranking videos, I do have a long playlist, and if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.